For some reason these days, there's some talk about AEW having some money problems. Very interesting. So we're going to talk about these problems in today's video. We're also going to talk about ROH's new Hall of Fame inductee and an AEW wrestler who had to clarify that he's not leaving AEW after posting a very emotional message on social media. If you guys want more videos like this, don't forget to click that subscribe button and ring that bell for more. We are going to discuss ROH's next inductee because it is very well, in fact, CM Punk, which is fantastic news. Obviously, the Briscoes being announced first, then we get Bryan Danielson, CM Punk, Samoa Joe. It's a very exciting time for ROH. We don't really know what to expect with their company. They're coming back for Supercard of Honor. I would love nothing more than to see CM Punk and Bryan Danielson team up at ROH's Supercard of Honor. That's probably wishful thinking, but I was correct in predicting that CM Punk would be the next inductee. We actually talked about this around the same time last week. I don't know what else more there is to say about CM Punk winning any sort of achievement like this, because CM Punk has been at the top of wrestling for so long. He took a break for 7 years, came back, and immediately made an impact for AEW. So, you know, CM Punk and his career in ROH was fantastic, but outside of ROH was also fantastic. Whether you like or hate WWE, CM Punk accomplished a lot of big things there. Whether you like or hate AEW, he's doing a lot of cool things in AEW right now. So my point that I'm making is this is great news for wrestling, great news for ROH. And I hope that AEW prior to ROH, they end up promoting the Supercard of Honor. I hope they promote a little bit of that Hall of Fame induction, because without ROH, I don't genuinely believe there is an AEW, and I think AEW should be the one to kind of help ROH. They don't have to, but if they could, I think it would be great for pro wrestling, especially since AEW has teamed up with AAA and Impact and New Japan and all these other companies. I think them having a good relationship with Ring of Honor would be just as important. I want to talk about Brian Pillman Jr. He posted something about leaving Jacksonville. And honestly, if you read his post, it is an incredibly long post, but if you read his post, it did sound like he was he was leaving AEW, you know, leaving Jacksonville. He got robbed, heartbroken, a whole bunch of stuff. He thanked Tony Khan and AEW, but he decided to leave Jacksonville and move back to Cincinnati. And just the way the post was put, it did look like he was leaving AEW. He actually had to clarify because there were so many people suggesting that he was leaving. No, Brian Pillman Jr. is not leaving AEW. Thankfully, I think Brian Pillman Jr., he's not there yet, but he is getting better every week that we see him. And I think when AEW utilizes Brian Pillman Jr., they tend to do a good job. The problem is they don't use him as consistently, which kind of sucks, because I think when they were in Ohio and you had Jon Moxley and Brian Pillman Jr. literally have the crowd go crazy, I mean, it showed you a lot of potential with Brian Pillman Jr. And then since then, yes, they got the stuff with Malachi Black, but that has kind of been overshadowed by Penta and Pac. So, you know, this whole thing with Brian Pillman Jr. and the Varsity Blondes, I hope AEW picks it up, because I do like Brian Pillman Jr. The only way he's going to get better in front of 10,000 fans is if he's actually performing in front of 10,000 fans. Whether it's Rampage or Dynamite, I would like to see more of him. And yeah, the good thing is he's not obviously leaving AEW. So good news for AEW, good news for Brian Pillman Jr. I think he's one of these young guys. I think it was very clear too when he was in MLW and he transitioned to AEW. It was very obvious that AEW was investing in their youth here, because you know you gotta have a wave of young crop of talent that is rising, you know, on occasion. And I think Brian Pillman Jr. and Griff Garrison and Julia Hart, they have something unique together. So why not utilize that? Let me know what you guys think about that story. Guys, we got to get into this, though. This is some crazy stuff. AEW money problems. There has been this talk about money problems for a while. The internet, I don't know if it's like an anti-AEW thing, if it's a pro-WWE thing, but it makes me think a little bit more about the wrestling community as a whole. Especially recently, there's been some channels who have been discussing AEW money problems. And the reason why they've been discussing this is because Cody Rhodes is reportedly asking for a lot of money from AEW, and reportedly AEW cannot afford to give Cody Rhodes this type of money. It was reported that Cody Rhodes wanted the same type of money as CM Punk and Bryan Danielson. Now, I can't speak on how AEW pays their contracts in 2022. What I do know is that in February 2019, AEW's Brandy Rhodes talked about equal pay for men and women in AEW between main event and this and that. And, you know, if you're on TV, if you're a champion, if you came from somewhere, there was a lot of talk about equal pay for AEW. Now, I don't know if AEW follows that right now because there's no financial terms discussed. And yes, it is true that Bray Wyatt and Braun Strowman aren't in the company. Now, months ago, we talked about it on the channel that the reason why they weren't brought in was for financial issues. Now there's reports coming out about financial problems within the WWE locker room. Now, this is very interesting because Meltzer was talking about the WWE locker room and how they perceive AEW does have financial troubles. So Meltzer said on the WWE side, talent was talking like AEW had a budget issue, noting that the two names who were great workers had deals up, Kevin Owens being one and the other Sami Zayn, which, by the way, they have re-signed with WWE. They did not go to AEW. There was at least some interest in them as far as seeing what AEW had. Legally, neither one could be negotiated with, and Owens signed a new deal before his old deal expired. So Kevin Owens presumably knew that he couldn't sign with AEW because of financial troubles. The other is still working on, still within the company, appearing regularly on television. AEW didn't make a play, and the word was that AEW had a talent budget and were not going to match the WWE's high offers unless or until they got a new and higher paying television deal. And that won't be until the start of 2024. Khan also talked about signing more new talent with Keith Lee, Shane Strickland, Jeff Hardy, all being expected at some point, and other ex-WWE names that have been talked with, such as Buddy Matthews. So again, AEW does not have a budget problem. AEW has a budget. And it is very clear that we discussed that. AEW has a budget that they have to work with. Now, rich people will decide if they need to increase their budget if it makes business sense. Now, I can't speak about the internal workings of AEW, but I'm going to utilize this Cody Rhodes situation because I see a lot of these large YouTube channels telling you that there's money problems. They're trying to sell you on the fact that AEW is doomed. I mean, Sportskeeda in 2021 was literally using AEW as reportedly in debts due to major investments with video games. Guys, rich people get rich because they spend their money, okay? Like, you could look and you could look into this if you would like. I am telling you what I have seen from other interviews with rich people. And they always say, you get richer by investing your money. You don't get rich by letting your money sit there. Tony Khan is investing in wrestling video games. He is investing in his live production. He is investing in a lot of stuff. Now, whether or not you like or hate AEW, let's just say, for example, Cody Rhodes is actually not going to WWE and this is all a work. That is very interesting because for months and months and months, there's been this narrative that AEW is having money problems, and I just don't understand it. I think people are misconstrued. It's the idea is misconstrued that money problems means not willing to increase your budget. Tony Khan very well could not be profitable, but that doesn't mean he's struggling financially. Very strange, but we had to discuss this. AEW is not having money problems. AEW has a much bigger problem than that, and I think that's something we need to discuss for another time. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below.